David is chosen. In our last story, we learned about Saul's rejection as king. His pride, greed, and disobedience lost him the favor of God. Samuel wept over Saul's fall. Now we will learn about God's new king, chosen not for his stature or status, but his heart, inspired by the book of 1 Samuel. Samuel mourned the loss of Saul's soul to the burden of power. He mourned the state of Israel under a king with a weakness for status and fame. God came to Samuel in his mourning and said, "Why do you grieve over Saul? I have rejected him. Go, fill up your horn with oil and go to the home of Jesse in Bethlehem. I have provided Israel with a new king among his sons." Samuel's heart began to pound. Excitement filled his old bones. He gathered sacrifices to be made in Bethlehem, for he did not want Saul to know he was searching for a king. Samuel greeted Jesse, and the two of them ate together and consecrated the land for God. Samuel looked at Jesse intently and asked if he could bring forth his sons. When they came, Samuel looked at the oldest, Eliab. He was a well-built man, tall, muscular, and had charismatic qualities that made up a king. Surely this must be the Lord's anointed, Samuel thought to himself. Yet God interrupted him and said, "Do not look at his stature or looks, for I do not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but I look upon the heart." Abinadab came forth before Samuel, and he too was not the one God had chosen. 7 more of his sons passed by Samuel, and none of them were the one God had spoken of. Frustrated and a bit flustered, Samuel turned to Jesse and said, "Are these all your sons?" Jesse scratched his head and said, "Well, there is still the youngest. He is out in the field tending to the sheep." David was in the fields. The day was almost over, and the cool spring air whistled across the grass where the sheep fed. David often took them to a hill not too far from home, where he would sit and look at the stars. David sat in complete peace, but still on alert for any predators that may lurk around the corner. David took a deep breath, soaking in the last rays of good sunlight. As his eyes were closed, he could hear his father's voice in the distance, beckoning him. Slowly and methodically, David corralled the sheep and stepped into his father's house. Samuel was sitting when David entered into the home. He had a smile on his face. He was a handsome young man, no older than 17, and had beautiful eyes that made you feel warm and welcomed. God whispered to Samuel and said, "Arise, for this is my king." So Samuel stood up slowly and laughed. He looked at David and anointed him with oil. Samuel did not tell David or Jesse that he was going to be king of Israel, for he knew that the Lord would call David in due time. From that time forward, the Spirit of God was upon David. Weeks had passed, and Saul was greatly disturbed at night. His dreams consumed him, and his days were filled with anxiety, paranoia, and loneliness. God had departed from him, and he could not bear the sight of himself in the mirror. Saul's servant saw how tormented he was, and offered respite in the form of music. "My lord," the servant said, "I know of a man named Jesse who is in Bethlehem. His son is very skilled with the lyre, and could possibly offer you rest with his music." So Saul sent for David, and David served under Saul as his musician and armor-bearer. Saul grew to love David as a son, and whenever he was tormented, David would play music and worship God in his presence. Listening to David's worship was the closest to God he had felt in months. David was only a few feet from the throne that God had called him to sit upon, yet neither him nor Saul knew that. God was in their midst. He would raise up David as he once did Moses, Joshua, and every judge that came before him. David was his chosen hero, destined to change the course of Israel forever.